we have the award-winning FinOps team from Fidelity. Zach Stitham and Noel Crowley, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a round of applause. And as you come in, the front row is not a splash zone. It actually just helps you see the font better. And take it away, Zach and Noel.
So thank you. Noel and I, we did pull an audible, so we will not be up there. There could be an accident with the two of us up there. There's not enough room for the two of us up there, so we're going to stay down here. So I am Zach Stitham. I am head up the Cloud Business Office for Fidelity Investments for Enterprise Cloud Computing.
I'm Noel Crowley. I'm Director of Cloud FinOps for Enterprise Cloud Computing and ECC in Fidelity.
So today, Noel and I are going to talk to you guys about our journey from the whole crawl, walk, run. Someday, hopefully it'll fly, maybe. And then we'll get to that whole, how we used our KPIs to, I would say, try to advance the maturity of our practice and at least test ourselves a little bit out each year. But to start off, who is Fidelity? So I'll just ask the audience, anybody a Fidelity customer? Fantastic, fantastic. Wow, wasn't expecting that many. So whether you hold your brokerage account, whether it's stock plan services, whether it's 401k, all fantastic things. Fidelity, large financial institution. However, in my 24 years, Noel 15 years, he would agree, like we are a company we look at ourselves like technology company that happens to do financial services. So very fortunate in that respect. So when we look at co-founded in 1946, or we think about when we started to go to cloud, 2016 we put our first application out there, and then 2019 we came on our journey where we set our hybrid strategy. So now, we're here to talk about, cloud and where we are. And, 4 years later, you heard me say today, 45% of our applications fully in the cloud, no on-premise infrastructure, 54% of our applications have a cloud presence, all going towards 70% by the end of 2024, and hopefully by 2026 we'd be 100% in the cloud. So when we started that journey, we had to create a FinOps practice. As the team enters the room, right on cue, right on time, we went and we got, I would say, there was three of us coming from central IT, coming from the business, coming from finance. Like any good FinOps practice, sponsorship's key. So we were fortunate in that respect that, we had buy-in from my CIO who led Enterprise Cloud Computing from the central technology side, the head of finance. So, we had buy-in there. So dual sponsorship checks the box. However, every single business unit that we're a federated company, just like most major, enterprises, how do you get buy-in across the board? And this is where, that hub and spoke model truly got created, where the hub focused on those things that were centralized, like making purchasing strategies, reservations, savings plans, looking at tooling, making sure that we had transparency for our cloud costs. And then the business side focused on implementing best practices on their journey to cloud, and then bringing all that back to one centralized team, making sure that we were sharing best practices, making sure that we could scale across the environment. So, think about leadership principles at Fidelity. We talked a little bit about, thinks and works across Fidelity. This team, I would say, all about that. One single mission between us all. That was essentially making sure we get the most value of every dollar that's spent in the cloud. So as we start our journey, we think about how do we do that? How do we measure our success? How do we measure our effectiveness?
Thanks, Zach. So when we sat down and we wanted to measure our effectiveness, we put together 5 steps, 5 areas we wanted to look at. We called them our FinOps focus. And as we worked at it from the bottom up, we looked at cost transparency. The very first thing we knew when we started to go to the cloud was we got a third-party tool in to help us visualize our costs. It was the easiest way to get that started. So we were happy enough that we could see our costs that were being allocated by account, by application. We already had a good tagging policy in place as well, so we were able to see that. So the first step in our ladder, we thought we got that one, cost transparency. Next one we wanted to look at was our financial controls. Well, we already had budgeting in place, so we're a financial company. We had buy-in from our finance department. As you saw on the previous slide, there was a finance representation on the FinOps practice. We also had agreement that we could purchase our reservations and whatnot for the firm at that level. So we were happy that we had hit our financial controls. Then we wanted to look at where we could go next. Purchasing strategies. When we were buying stuff that we were ensuring that we were getting the best value for it, were we getting the discounts that were available to us? So that was the first area that we wanted to look at in our KPI journey when we started this off back in 2019. Yeah. So we then came up with our performance year 2020 KPIs. And you can see they're all purchasing effectiveness. The first ones I want to talk to are the ones in the middle. Percentage of eligible services covered by RIs. Well, we had a pretty much a simple plan. Follow the money. Where are we spending money? Majority of our money was being spent on EC2, so that's what we concentrated on mostly first, purchasing our reservations and stuff in that space. Now, we didn't ignore the RDSs and all the other services that we were using. We did continuously look at reservations and all those spaces and VM compute and all that as well. But we did concentrate on our reserves for EC2 because that was giving us our big impact. The next one we really concentrated on a lot was our spot coverage. I don't think there's anyone in the room who wouldn't agree that that's the best discount you're going to get. Use spot. So we drove that. We tried to get people to adopt spot and use spot. Combining the two of those together, that gave us our overall percentage discount, which you can see there is weighted at the highest. We used an index metric for this KPI so that we could try and drive the right attitudes as we went along. So that gave us our first KPI, our first year at this. So we were happy as we came out of our first year. We're purchasing effectiveness. We were doing it. We were hitting our targets. We were getting our reservations. We were able to get there. We knew that, unfortunately, we had Zach and myself in the center purchasing the reservations for the firm. We were able to do that. So we were one party doing that. We had one other business unit who pretty much represented 50% of our spot purchasing. So there was only one other party really using spot. So that left two of us responsible for the firm's success. So what we wanted to try and do was engage the engineers and look at the optimization of the hardware or the services that they were using. So if they were buying it, were they using it? And that led us going from our 2020 KPI into our 2021 KPI performance year. We knew everything was working from our purchasing effectiveness. We were hitting those targets. So now we moved all three of those into one purchasing effectiveness metric. And watch the weighting of these as we go through this. We created a new one, or underutilized resources. So what we tried to do was say, if we have people using stuff, can we help them just to get rid of stuff that they're not using, delete things they didn't need, stuff like snapshots, orphan volumes, that kind of thing. Can we put automation out there for that? So we did that. We created bots to do that for them so that they didn't have to worry about it and they could do what they wanted to do best. The engineers were happy that way. And we tried utilization. And here we were looking at the one metric that was there, we didn't have to do anything for it. The engineers didn't have to do anything for it. It was CPU utilization. And what we wanted to do was get 100% improvement on your CPU utilization. We knew that if we could get people to use one EC2 instance, one size smaller, it's going to cut your bill in half, right? And we knew what our spend was. We knew where the impact of that would be. So that's what we tried to drive into 2021, I should say. So as we came out of 2021, we weren't happy that IT optimization was going in the right direction. So we stayed at that. We didn't continue to move up our ladder here. So as we come out of 2021, start into our 2022 KPI journey, we didn't hit our optimization. We did hit our utilization. We did hit our purchasing effectiveness. So we changed the weighting here again we changed the weighting on our purchasing effectiveness again, and we dropped down to 50. We then probably made the best thing we could have possibly done for the firm. We made a hire. We went out to the market, and in this world, we went somebody who wasn't IT. We went and hired a lumberjack. And this guy, his name is Zach, but he spells it with a K.
Much different.
Very important. He is obsessed with the money tree, and he wants to cut down costs before they reach the cloud. He doesn't look like anybody or has any relationship to anybody in the FinOps practice. And his reports did not have a meeting about him and build a character on that. We brought this guy in. And what he does is he goes out and he looks for instances, EC2 out there in there, and he turns it off. All your compute, and he turns it off for you at the weekend. Unless, of course, you want to keep it running, you have a reason to keep it running in our non-production environments. So he goes out and does that for us. Then came the harder bit, our underutilized resources. As I said earlier, we were trying to collect, we were collecting memory, and we're asking people to just increase their utilization by 100%. the reality is there's way more than just CPU that's important in an EC2 instance, right? There's memory, there's IOPS, there's storage, there's everything else that's going along with it. So we tried to bring in other metrics. We started collecting metrics, and we created this underutilized assets KPI metric. And we started to encourage people to engage in that and collect that memory and give that information back to them to help them come in and hit it and help us with that. Sorry. So that was how we're now here in 2022, as we're coming towards the end of our performance here. And that leads us now into the future of where we're going with our KPIs.
Yeah, so as we look forward, there's a lot up there. We see a lot of different services. We've seen a lot of different changes. Purchasing strategies that have been available. When we first started, it was just reserved instances. Savings plans come along. There's just a lot of different things when we look at what's going to take place. But I don't think our objective has changed at all. So if we look over those 3 years, we're trying to achieve the best discount we can for the services that that we're utilizing. We're trying to make sure that we eliminate any waste. If you heard Jen speak today around the zombie assets, so anything that's sitting out there orphaned, making sure we're deleting it, making sure we're have best practices from a cleanup perspective, and that wasn't always easy either. So when we went into this, and Noel talks about in 2020 when we implemented it, we were going out account by account. Fidelity's got over 1,000 accounts, not necessarily a scalable thing. We made some great progress at times, but then flip back to that power of our team, where it's the team meets together. We go say, this should be a standard policy across the board. Let's go present this to the CIOs, and we got agreement. So again, now development environments automatically turned on for all of our accounts. And then the last one, just making sure we utilize those resources effectively. So if it's CPU utilization, if it's memory, and all knowing that if you can cut your t-shirt size in half, you're cutting your costs in half. So when Noel mentions the index metric, I'll credit Jen with the index metrics, no doubt about it. You've seen us every year when we try to mature, and it's really the weighting that has made the difference for us. So as you think about that first year where we're doing purchasing effectiveness, it was 100% us. Like Noel said, 2 groups where we were executing the purchases. Jen's group was executing spot across the board, but again, trying to get the rest of the organization and build that culture of accountability and push it down to the engineer level. So each year you'll see us increase those weightings so that at the end of the day, that underutilized aspect of you have to utilize those resources efficiently when you're deploying, when you're using it, when you're building, instead of it's in the cloud, it's after the fact. So really trying to push that culture of accountability back to the business units. And that's been the biggest change going, and the biggest hard part about our journey of that first year, we knocked it out of the park. But getting down to the developer level, it's just not top of mind. So again, when they're deploying and they're thinking about their business, they're thinking about feature functionality, not necessarily thinking about cost. They never had to do that before. So again, back to that just, power of the spoke and hub model. So like I said, again, you take a small group of individuals all with the same purpose, and then utilize that KPI to try to push. And again, what you're doing is the size of the hub ends up shrinking, and the size of the spokes end up growing, because the spokes are where the development's all taking place. So if we can end up doing that, like what the future ends up looking like from a focus perspective with everything that's going on, it just ends up changing. So that is the one thing that we end up trying to push across the organization is the culture, instead of looking at all the other individual aspects of what will change. So that's been our journey so far, and so far it's been successful. And we're here the rest of the next 2 days. We'd love to hear what you guys are doing from a KPI perspective, how you're thinking about your organizations. Come reach out to Noel or I, or Mike or Sonny or Jen. We'd love to have that discussion with you. And again, any questions, we're happy to take those. But that's been our FinOps journey so far.
Hold on. We
You
gotta make
can
sure
ask
everybody
Paul
hears.
questions too.
We'll start up front here.
Okay. There's some cost savings that you probably are driving from things like Intel to AMD substitution or upgrading to a newest, latest family of a VM. So where are you running it? Is it in the spokes, and do you have a KPI that you track also those?
So every KPI that we have is an enterprise KPI, but with our reporting aspect, we have a score down to every single business unit level. So when we do our reporting back to senior management, we call it our one pager, and each of those have their individual scores. So we've broken it down to that aspect. And the other neat thing is, anything that was a KPI a year ago, it's not like we ever get rid of it. It just becomes a metric the following year, and we end up having our dashboards that, become a little bit more in-depth from here's the executive presence type dashboard down to here's the power user type dashboard to really get down to what your score is.
What kind of rights does the hub need to get all this data? Does the hub have access to all these accounts, or do you have some sort of policy for all the spokes to report these KPIs, like CPU? How do you get that, centrally in the hub?
So simplest, we have created a dashboard to present that data to the business units and to everybody, right? But any of that data that someone to get, we have a third-party tool that displays it all for us, and everybody can get access to that. So the hub, the developer, product managers, product owners, whoever needs the information or wants the information, we give them access, come and give them a roadshow on how to use the tools.
Yeah, so it's like, think of the master payer. We have access and a role to view all the data from the master payer all the way down, as opposed to the developer has access for their own individual linked account, and they can see their linked account. We have one master payer in both clouds.
So I had a question for you. You have the KPIs. Did you also have to get goals created that were aligned around this, that the teams were being measured on, or just making this visible was enough to drive behavior?
So it's like, I'll call it, 3 different legs of the stool for us from an enterprise cloud perspective, where it's adoption of the cloud was one goal, making sure that we're putting applications out there that were fully in the cloud without any on-prem. Making sure we do it in a secure and safe manner. So we had governance gates, making sure that teams are passing governance gates before they're deploying to the cloud. And then the third one was the cost aspect or the optimization. So it's really, those 3 things are visible across the board for all the business units. And then, so it's both the development side and to make sure, you're doing it in the most cost-effective manner possible.
We're gonna do 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, question is, how do you guys deal with the variability of different systems? Like, for example, like what intervals are you using to evaluate the utilization? And then also, like, does that is also inclusive to supporting, auto scaling configurations versus where some folks might not have auto scaling enabled? Yeah,
So we're looking at the data nearly daily, right? We measure it monthly, right? So we take a cut monthly and present it back as straight as we can. As to auto scaling and stuff like that, if you're using it, it's bonus. We're not measuring if you're part of an auto scaling group at the moment, but if you're using it, we're trying to build and understand, and maybe might be a conversation later, but is how do we effectively say that an auto scaling group is actually working or giving us the outcome that's the best from a FinOps point of view, right? It's like, hey, yeah, you can have an auto scaling group there, but if it never scales, what's the point, right? So does that answer it?
How do you map the business metrics to these efficiency metrics? So is that your role? Is that the hub? Do you just leave that with them? Because each possibly the spoke is responsible for delivering to the business. Is that their responsibility, or do you actually show that at an executive level as well?
Yeah, so as far as using something like AWS organizations from the structure perspective and how we set up our accounts, we have it where it's, master payer. We have every single business unit is their own next level down organization, and then you get into the development versus QA versus prod versus sandbox. So that's one aspect, and then we have the ability to do, like, I'll call it account mappings on top of that for other granularity. We may take other sources of data and try to merge it, because again, when you talk about the spokes, they might be all set up differently. So some may be in agile practice mode where they're talking about squads and trying to get down to that next level breakdown to truly make it actionable for that particular business unit. And that's where I say we're not standard across the board yet. So we're trying to do some, I would say, customization sometimes to try to make the data as actionable and down to the lowest level to make it, effective for the developers to go, make some changes.
I will say the business units are responsible for executing against it.
Yes.
Creating a plan, so they all know the business unit goals also, and we may implement it differently for each business unit for each goal.
Yep.
A little bit.
She said the business units are responsible for implementing. So they may be accountable for the overall goal, but for their business unit, they're definitely responsible for implementing any of those changes.
What are some of the tools and their methodologies that you use to help drive up their EC2 utilization or your EC2 targets?
Sorry, I missed that. Can you say it again?
What are some of the tools or methodologies you use to help drive up EC2 utilization specifically? Or has been successful in help driving it
So
up?
you know the KPI I had at the end there, the utilization index. That in itself is just a calculation, right? That we do, right? We base CPU utilization at a certain level or memory utilization at a certain level. And if you're above those, we say your EC2 instance is optimized. At that, I'll knock the place down. That has probably been the best way we've found to help get people to take some action on this. Because previous to this, they were saying, oh, we were giving them memory information. We're going, oh yeah, but we're giving them CPU information. I'm memory constrained. Well, now we're giving them memory information as well, and we're able to say to them, look, you're not for either one.
So then visibility and transparency, I guess,
Yeah.
helps there.
You know, taking CloudWatch data.
Sorry, yeah. Yes, CloudWatch data.
Making that visible, but then again, I'll tweak it one aspect. It's when we talk about the hours of utilization, we're talking about ISF hours. So again, the intent was to look at your biggest, we'll call it non-optimized instances first, and seeing if you could optimize those to bring them down. We're not asking for 100% of the hours to be optimized. We're actually set a threshold, you know, just again, try to make it visible and try to make it actionable for the developer to go take a look.
Great talk, thank you. Quick question. You mentioned that one of Fidelity's goals is to drive cloud adoption to 70%. Do you see FinOps playing a role in driving that adoption, and do any of these KPIs play a part in getting there?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, if we talk about, you know, the migration to cloud, if we were just to put stuff in the cloud and we never exited on-prem and just increase our costs, would be a failure. And again, I would say all my peers would agree that, you know, if we went to the cloud and we don't do it in a cost-effective manner, failure. So it was, again, one of the 3 pillars I mentioned earlier that go in, you know, secure and safe, and then make sure you do it in a cost-effective manner. So visibility is there. We're lucky. It's been key. Like, it's one of the questions I think our chairwoman was always going to be like, we know there's going to be a bubble as we go to the cloud where we're going to be on-prem and we're going to be in cloud at the same time. It's just a matter of how long will that bubble be and how high will that bubble go. So, you know, hence the creation of a FinOps team to try to make the bubble as small as possible when we're doing it. And then on the other side, once we're there, make sure we maintain those costs.
Hold on, Ron.
Thank you. Can you expand a little bit more on the developer experience with consumption of the KPIs? Is that something, the dashboard that they're supposed to go to, or is it kind of deeply embedded in their pipeline?
Yeah, I would just say that, again, back down to the individual business unit level, because everyone has a score, you know, I'd almost invite, you know, one of these guys to come up to go, they've got to go push this down, which is why the hub and spoke model, I think, works, where it's yes, we've got some dashboards that make it visible, but they're trying to drive activity within their business unit collectively across the board. So, you know, making sure that from the center, we scale it as much as possible to make sure there's like consistent, you know, practices going on. And someone like Jen who runs engineering or Sunny in architecture, trying to make sure that those get implemented upon implementation as far as after the fact once we're already in the cloud. And I say that every business unit's going to the cloud for different reasons at different times. We may have a business unit needs to exit a data center. So we're going to lift and shift on our way, and then we'll do the optimization afterwards, as opposed to we're going to go create some new greenfield activity over there and make sure that's optimized on the way in.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
So just on that as well, the developer experience and stuff like that, like, it's a dashboard, right? They're not going there. We created this wonderful looking dashboard, and to be honest with you, there was a few of us who would look at it, and it was doing the right thing. It was what we needed for ourselves as such, right? The FinOps practice, I'm pointing because they're sitting over here. We put together a game. We started developing it towards the end of last year, and we played it all through April. And we created a room where each KPI was explained to each developer, why we do, what the logic behind that was. What we saw was during the game, views of the dashboard obviously skyrocketed because that was one of the things you had to do to play the game and win the game. But we still see them going there now. There is certain parts of that data that's a BU level. It's not much, not a lot they can do with that. It's too high up. But there is one part of it, and that's the utilization index that they do go to because that's at their app ID. And they can see that changing every day. And we see them hitting that. So once we got that bit right, we're engaging them better. Is that okay?
Yeah, on the CPU and memory metrics that you guys are talking about, do you measure those at the kind of instance resource level, or do you actually kind of go down to maybe an application or workload level when you're looking at that and measuring it?
So it's down at the resource level, but we end up rolling it up on per application, per product line, per business unit. So we aggregate it in a couple different ways, but ultimately trying to get it down to that, that resource ID.
How much do you guys balance like gamification versus more formal policy? Meaning like if you have the KPIs, you can provide a leaderboard. Leaderboard is going to encourage people with competition amongst teams. Whereas a policy can be, if you're outside a certain threshold, min or max, you literally need to remediate. How do you guys look at that?
I'd say it's a fine balance going. We end up, leaning on the team from the business unit side to go, what do we think is appropriate sometimes to create as a policy. And then it's using the gamification as much as possible from an education standpoint to make sure that there's just an awareness around there. But truly a fine line between, implementing some rules or guardrails. From the security side, a whole lot easier to do as opposed to the financial savings side sometimes.
As well as that, like what we're trying to drive, one of the things, like all these other things, is the culture of accountability, is to get them aware that when they turn it on, you're paying for it until you turn it off. And then you're still paying for bits that are left behind. So we're trying to get that message out as well.
Is the majority of your teams using infrastructure as code?
Would you?
Majority of the team using infrastructure as a code. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the talk. One of the things you mentioned is that as you're migrating to cloud from on-prem, a lot of times you're just jumping from the data center, lift and shift into the cloud. Are you using any KPIs that drive towards the, I'm going to say modernization, but really driving towards a more cloud-native solution that could bring in a lot of cost efficiencies that way?
Yeah, so just let me clarify. These are all different business units doing different things. So we think about the 6 R's of migration. Lift and shift may be a small portion. So that whole re-architecture aspect, we track every application by what its 6R value is on its way to cloud, knowing, how many you're going to re-architect, how many you're going to re-platform, how many you're going to retire. So yeah, we have visibility to all that data along the way. And at times we would try to go look to see, I would say, was there one that was gaining more of a financial advantage than the other on its journey? And we could spend a whole nother talk with Mike on chargeback as far as like how did on-prem do chargeback as opposed to how we do it from a visibility standpoint in the cloud. And that correlation is just sometimes hard to really get to because of when you're peanut buttering costs on the on-prem environment in different ways as opposed to how granular the cloud can get. It just hasn't been an apples to apples comparison. But yeah, we have a lot of re-architecture that's taking place on the way to the cloud.
I want to thank Zach and Noel. And honestly, the audience here, there's great interaction between all of y'all. Now, before we do the applause, I want to say the room captain over here in Ballroom C wanted to do an applause competition. I was like, don't hurt yourself. But y'all did a great job. Like, everyone in this room did a great job. Presenters, you did a great job. Audience, you did a great job being an audience. Look at that. Look at that. That was weak. All right, let's put it together. All of us, here we go.
JR here from the FinOps Foundation. Thank you for watching. Please go to FinOps.org if you want to get plugged into this amazing community. And of course, hit subscribe right here on YouTube to get all the future content. Hope to see you soon.